You know, in the 21st century, people all over the world still refer to Jerusalem as the Holy City. But why? I filmed all over this city, and I can tell you that while it sits on many hills, it has no majestic, tall mountains. There are no fast-flowing rivers except in rainy season, and there are no really lush green valleys because basically Jerusalem was built on the desert and it's surrounded by the desert. And yet people today still refer to this city as the Holy City. Why? I'll explain in this episode of The Prophetic Connection. We know from the Bible that King David chose Jerusalem as the capital city of Israel 3,000 years ago. So there are frequent mentions of Jerusalem in the book of Psalms written about 3,000 years ago. And we know from other scriptures and throughout the Bible, in fact, that God chose Jerusalem as his city, as his dwelling place on earth. So we're not surprised then to find all of these references to Jerusalem. We read in, for example, in Psalm 102, verse 12, "But you, O Lord, shall endure forever, and the remembrance of your name to all generations. You will arise and have mercy on Zion." Zion is a synonym for Jerusalem, but also for Israel. But I think in this context, it's referring to the holy city. "For the time to favor her, yes, the set time has come. For your servants take pleasure in her stones and show favor to her dust." And then in another psalm, in Psalm 132, verse 13, "For the Lord has chosen Zion, he has desired it for his dwelling place. This is my resting place forever. Here I will dwell, for I have desired it." Supposedly, this is the Lord speaking through the psalmist of how much Jerusalem means to him. And so we call it the Holy City because God chose this city for his dwelling place on earth.
God used Israel's journey through time and circumstance to spread his light and influence across the continents to all nations. But the descendants of Abraham paid a heavy price in the process. During the centuries of their long exile and dispersion, they had to endure horrific suffering and hardship, culminating in a brutal Holocaust. But now, some nearly 2,000 years after their exile began, they have overcome their darkest of nights in a seemingly miraculous way and found their way home to the Promised Land. Yet their struggle to be light continues as before. And today the battle rages over the holy city itself, as two peoples, the Jews and the Palestinians, are locked in a never-ending conflict with no clear end in sight. This city the prophet said would be a shining light to the nations continues to be torn apart by conflict and the contradictory beliefs and aims of two different people groups, each claiming to be the rightful heirs of Abraham.
So I believe the primary reason we refer to Jerusalem as the holy city is that God chose it as his dwelling place. But there are other reasons, and that is that Jerusalem is sacred to the three primary monotheistic religions. That is, religions that believe in one creator God. The Jews, the Christians, the Muslims. This also helps to explain why there is a never-ending struggle over Jerusalem. People in the 21st century are fighting over the city's status and their right to the city and its sovereignty. But it's a struggle that has been going on for nearly 4,000 years. And we can trace the origins of this struggle back to the man Abraham and his two sons, Ishmael and Isaac. Now, I won't take the time to read all of the scriptures, but we understand from the book of Genesis that Abram had a son by Hagar, Sarah, his wife's Egyptian handmaiden. Sarah was well past the age of childbearing, but she wanted to give Abraham an heir, and so she used Hagar, her handmaiden, to bear Abraham a son. The boy's name was Ishmael. He was the firstborn. But God is in Abraham's story, and so we read in Genesis, in chapter 17, in verse 15, then God said to Abraham, as for Sarai, your wife, you shall not call her name Sarai, but Sarah shall be her name. And I will bless her and also give you a son by her. Then I will bless her, and she shall be a mother of nations, kings of people shall come from her. Then Abraham fell on his face and laughed, and said in his heart, shall a child be born to a man who is 100 years old? And shall Sarah, who is 90 years old, bear a child? And Abraham said to God, oh, that Ishmael might live before you. It was a natural thing for him to say, because he only had one son, and the son's name was Ishmael by Hagar, the Egyptian. Then God said, no, Sarah, your wife, shall bear you a son, and you shall call his name Isaac. Ironically, Isaac means laughter. And so this is God's way of saying to Abraham, you shouldn't have laughed. And so he names this new son Isaac. I will establish my covenant with him for an everlasting covenant, and with his descendants after him. So these are the Jewish people today. They can trace their lineage all the way back to Isaac and to Abraham. But then, in verse 20 of Genesis 17, and as for Ishmael, I have heard you. Behold, I have blessed him, and will make him fruitful, and will multiply him exceedingly. He shall beget 12 princes, and I will make him a great nation. And then we have a but. But my covenant I will establish with Isaac, whom Sarah shall bear to you at this set time next year. Then he finished talking with him, God finished talking with Abraham, and God went up from Abraham. The irony in this story is that God named Isaac months before he was born. And we can see from this that this was God's plan all the time. But now we have two sons, and in a general, well, the Jewish people can trace their lineage back to Isaac. And in a general sense, people today speak of the Arabian nations as the descendants of Ishmael. Now, to be sure, over nearly 4,000 years, those descendants would have intermarried, and who knows who can properly identify today the sons of Ishmael. But in a general sense, in the Middle East, in that region, it's believed that the Arabic nations are the descendants of Ishmael. So this helps to explain the ongoing strife and struggle, the fight for the right to sovereignty over Jerusalem, and it continues today, as before, through all the centuries, and now into the 21st century.
Abraham's descendants have been locked in a centuries-old fight to be light, ever since God first spoke to their ancestral forefather and made promises to him concerning the land, the nation, and the blessings that would eventually flow from them to all nations. And nowhere else is this conflict more apparent than in Jerusalem. The Jewish temple once stood prominently here at the very epicenter of Jewish life and Torah practice, until it was completely destroyed by the Romans in 70 AD. This triggered a Jewish diaspora that lasted nearly 2,000 years. Then, with the rise of Islam in the 7th century AD and the subsequent conquest of the Holy Land by the Muslim armies, it wasn't long before the Islamic builders were erecting symbols of their own on the site where the temple once stood. This was Islam's way of saying, we have come, we have conquered, and we are here to stay. Today, 2 mosques continue to occupy this sacred site, known as the Temple Mount. They have been here since the 7th century. The irony is that Islam's roots are not in Israel but in Saudi Arabia, where the Prophet Muhammad, Islam's founder, was born. Jewish roots, on the other hand, are firmly embedded deep in the soil of the Holy Land. All of this calls into question who can rightfully claim a birthright and inheritance in the Promised Land. To whom did the Almighty God promise this land? The answer to this question has been echoed down through the centuries on the lips of Jews who have not forgotten God's promises to their forefather, Abraham.
The ultimate tragedy of our conflict with our Arab and Palestinian neighbors, and which has generated war and terrorism for well over 60 years, is the fact that our neighbors consider me sitting here in Jerusalem to be a myth. That there never was a Jewish people in Jerusalem. There never was a temple in Jerusalem. There never was a King David in Jerusalem. And hence, we are here as strangers. We are here as occupiers. We are here as colonialists. This is what they have indoctrinated their people, their youngsters. Now, 4 or 5 generations of this indoctrination.
One of the great problems that we face in Israel is that the Palestinians have adopted an Islamic interpretation which says that Israel has to be destroyed for Allah. Israel has to be destroyed for Islam. This is a basic message of the Hamas. The Hamas has it in their charter. They've said it many, many times on television, that Israel is on land that's holy waqf, holy Islamic land, and Islam demands the destruction of Israel.
Beneath the extravagant dome of the rock is a large slab of rock. According to Jewish tradition, it was upon this very rock that God asked Abraham to sacrifice Isaac. The Bible, however, tells us that God, having given Abraham this unusual test of obedience, then intervened and provided a substitute sacrifice in the form of a ram. In time, according to the biblical account, this sacred site also became God's preferred location for Israel's holy temple, what became over time the symbolic heart of Israel's relationship with God. In recent years, the followers of Islam have offered a different account of the history of this sacred site.
أن هناك رؤية لأن يكون مكانها قدس الأقداس في الهيكل المزعوم وهو مجرد وهم بالمناسبة لا يوجد له أي أثر لا في الأثريات ولا في وأسطورة.
Muslim tradition argues that there never was a Jewish temple on this site. Muslims also claim that it wasn't Isaac who was about to be sacrificed, but Ishmael, Isaac's older brother and Abraham's firstborn son by Hagar, the Egyptian servant of his wife Sarah. What is curious about this ongoing debate is that in the Quran, there is not a single mention of Jerusalem. The Jewish Tanakh, on the other hand, or Old Testament, as it is called in the tradition of Christianity, has literally hundreds of references to Jerusalem, many making specific mention of the temple and the sacred ground on which it stood.
The Palestinians, amongst their own people in Arabic, make it very clear that the goal is to have a Middle East without Israel in it. Every map that they produce has Palestine but doesn't have Israel. In the educational programming on television, that's the way they anticipate the world. There was a video clip that ran for a couple of years through 2009 on Palestinian television, which opens with the words, "We will liberate the land of religions." And at the end of this clip, they sing about the cities that they're going to liberate. And which are those cities? It's Haifa, and it's Jaffa, and it's the Galil, it's all of Israel. And this is being done by the so-called moderate Palestinians. This is being done on Mahmoud Abbas's television, the Fatah television, the people who Israel is supposed to reach an agreement with. So what we're having is, there are two languages to the Western world, to Europeans, to Americans. The Palestinians are talking about living at peace with Israel. To their own people, they are presenting peace treaty with Israel as a temporary stage to shrink Israel's size, to weaken Israel, and then eventually destroy Israel.
While it is generally accepted that the Jews are the descendants of Isaac, there is much debate concerning the true descendants of Ishmael. The commonly held belief is that Ishmael's descendants are the peoples of the Arabian nations. However, after 4 millennia of migration, intermarriage, and assimilation, any attempt to accurately identify the true descendants of Ishmael seems impossible. This has not stopped Palestinians in particular, or the adherents of Islam in general, from laying competing claims to Jerusalem and the entire Holy Land as their rightful inheritance.
For all the struggles over Jerusalem down through the centuries, there's an irony in the name Jerusalem. It means peace. And in the Hebrew, it's Yerushalayim, which is a plural word, which is interesting because there is only one Jerusalem. Unless you read the Bible and understand at the end of the Bible in the book of Revelation that a new Jerusalem is coming down from heaven one day. And so that's one way of thinking, this irony that in the Hebrew, Yerushalayim means two Jerusalems. It's curious. But when tourists go to Israel, they learn certain phrases, but they learn one word in particular, and the word is shalom. It means peace. It's the name of the city they're visiting when they're in Jerusalem. It also means hello, goodbye, blessings. All these things are wrapped up in this word shalom, which is part of the name of Jerusalem. The great irony in all of this is Jerusalem means peace, but this city has rarely known lasting peace.
Virtually lost in the ongoing debate about national rights to the land of Israel is that God chose and purposed to bless the descendants of Abraham through Isaac in unique ways. God said his covenants were to be made with them, including the covenant of the land. And God said to Abraham, "I will establish my covenant as an everlasting covenant between me and you, and your descendants after you for the generations to come, to be your God and the God of your descendants after you. The whole land of Canaan, where you are now an alien, I will give as an everlasting possession to you and your descendants after you, and I will be their God." Then God said, "Yes, but your wife Sarah will bear you a son, and you will call him Isaac. I will establish my covenant with him as an everlasting covenant for his descendants after him. And as for Ishmael, I have heard you. I will surely bless him. I will make him fruitful and will greatly increase his numbers. He will be the father of 12 rulers, and I will make him into a great nation. But my covenant I will establish with Isaac, whom Sarah will bear to you by this time next year."
The Bible is a document about real estate. Yes, land. Land is important. You can't open up a page, certainly of the Hebrew Bible, without encountering land. You keep the covenant in order to inherit the land of Israel. This is the land God promised to the Jewish people in perpetuity. And it talks about the borders of that land and its vast dimensions, and that this is to be their homeland. The Jews are the indigenous people within this land, and it is to be theirs.
There is but one people in the whole of the Middle East that speaks the same language, tills the same soil, practices the same faith, and bears the same name as its forefathers thousands of years ago. That is the people of Israel. And until this is acknowledged, that Israel is the nation state, the historic nation state of the Jewish people, then peace, as it is understood the word peace, peace is a relationship on the frontier between the United States and Canada. That's peace. Until that is acknowledged by our neighbors, we will never know real peace.
Today, more than ever before, it seems as though our world is at a tipping point as generation after generation slips further into chaos and darkness. Not since the days of Noah has the earth seen such decadence, immorality, and violence. But what does this mean for those who believe, and what consequences await for those who do not? As it was in the days of Noah, the DVD series of Dr. John Tweedie's 21st season of The Prophetic Connection explores the scriptures to uncover the meaning behind the signs of these troubled times. Call the number on your screen now, 1-888-206-1986, or visit c4iamerica.com to become a new monthly partner with your gift of just $25 a month or more, and you will receive this DVD set, ideal for individuals or small group studies, along with the bi-monthly newspaper, Israel the Prophetic Connection. We're waiting to hear from you. The reality is that the people of Israel live in a very hostile neighborhood, where they are surrounded by enemies seeking their destruction. Enemies whose stated goal is to wipe them off the map, to extinguish their light. But this has not stopped the longing in Jewish hearts to find acceptance among the nations, to be appreciated for who they are, and for what they have contributed to the well-being of all humanity.
And that's one of our problems with our current conflict, is we're embraced in this conflict people who want to choose death, who seem to have a modern-day version of the old cult of Moloch. In this part of the world, there were a lot of horrible, idolatrous cults before the Jews came into the land, many thousands of years ago. Probably one of the worst was this cult of Moloch, where you used to throw your children into the fire. It was you would not only sacrifice humans, but your children, and horrible things. And it seems as though that's what many of our enemies are about today, are about sacrificing their children and bringing them up to be suicide bombers.
As I mentioned earlier in this segment, Jerusalem means peace. And yet the long history of this holy city has been one of turbulence, strife, sadly, terrorist attacks, bus bombings, and the like. And more recently, on October 7, 2023, when terrorists crossed the border from Gaza into Israel, Jerusalem itself was under attack. And there were missiles flying over or landing on Jerusalem, on the holy city. The struggle, in other words, continues as before.
We all have friends here who've lost children or parents or siblings in terror. I mean, you walk down these streets and you see this is where a bomb went off, or this is where a bus was blown up, or next door is where a young son a commander was killed leading his troops. this is part of our lives, and it doesn't stop us. We don't sit and we mourn when we're supposed to mourn. There are sad days in the year, but we go on.
With suffering so much a part of Jewish present and past experiences, one wonders how Jewish people can remain optimistic about the future. Given all they have been through over many centuries, it is as if they have a God-given resilience that allows them to overcome any and all obstacles that stand in the way of their destiny as carriers of God's light to the nations.
As we've shown in this episode, the struggle over the holy city continues as before. And as I conclude this episode, I really wish I could say these struggles are behind Jerusalem. But sadly, in truth, they are really a fulfillment of prophecy. Listen to the words of Zechariah, writing in the Old Testament period, a prophetic word. Zechariah 12, verse 2. Behold, I will make Jerusalem a cup of drunkenness to all the surrounding peoples, when they lay siege against Judah and Jerusalem. And it shall happen in that day that I will make Jerusalem a very heavy stone for all peoples. All who would heave it away will surely be cut in pieces, though all nations of the earth are gathered against it. Now that's happened many times in history, but in the broader context of Zechariah 12 and Zechariah chapter 14, we see that this is referring to a future event that hasn't happened even as I stand here today recording this episode. Jerusalem's struggles also lie ahead, but I can tell you this, that there is the promise of peace at last, when according to the Bible, the Prince of Peace, the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, Jesus of Nazareth, returns to Jerusalem in triumph. In Palm Sunday, he said to the crowds, "You will not see me again until you say, Baruch haba b'shem Adonai. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." So we look forward to that day when the Prince of Peace returns to Jerusalem. Then Jerusalem will know peace.
This past year has been incredibly challenging, from the attacks on Israel to the ongoing struggles faced by the Jewish people worldwide. We've seen heartache, loss, and resilience like never before. Yet in the midst of these trials, C4I has been a source of hope and support in the Holy Land, providing aid, comfort, and a tangible reminder that they are not alone. Your generosity makes this life-changing work possible. Your one-time gift of just $25 or more helps us continue this vital mission. And as a thank you for your support, you will receive the bi-monthly newspaper Israel the Prophetic Connection, filled with stories and articles keeping you informed and up to date on all that is happening in Israel. Call now, 1-888-206-1986, or visit c4iamerica.com to make your one-time donation. Together, we can make a difference for the people of Israel.